That ID could be anything. You people will print anything these days." Sergeant Kenneth Iverson didn't even look at the badge. He knocked it from Arnold Parsons' hand with the back of his wrist and let it hit the Delwood sidewalk like trash. With no time to spare, Iverson's handcuffs clicked shut on Arnold's wrists on a public sidewalk in broad daylight, with still badge on the ground and arms locked behind his back. Arnold said nothing. His jaw was tight and his eyes were steady. He just complied silently and walked where they directed him. Sergeant Iverson had no idea he had just handcuffed a 24-year FBI veteran, or that one missed phone call was already setting everything in motion. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago. Arnold Parson hadn't touched it. He sat in the corner booth of Ray's Diner, back against the wall, eyes forward, watching the street through the plate glass window like a man who got paid to notice things. Which he had for 24 years. Outside, Delwood County, Georgia moved at its Saturday afternoon pace. A couple walked a dog past a barber shop. A teenager on a bicycle swerved around a pothole. The sun sat heavy and bright over the main street, baking the sidewalks white. Arnold saw none of it. He was watching the building across the street. The Delwood County Sheriff's Department sat squat and brick-faced on the opposite corner, an American flag hanging limp above the entrance in the still afternoon air. 2 cruisers were parked out front. The blinds on the second floor were angled just enough to let someone look down at the street without being seen doing it. Arnold had noticed that detail on day 1. He was dressed like nobody. Jeans, a gray button-down shirt, running shoes, no badge visible, no gun visible. Just a black man in a diner booth with cold coffee and a folded newspaper he hadn't read. That was the point. For 6 days, he had been exactly that. Nobody. A contractor, supposedly, from Atlanta, bidding on a county road resurfacing project. He had shaken hands and smiled and asked the right dull questions about gravel grades and drainage specs. He had been polite and forgettable. And the whole time, he had been watching the money move. Operation Delwood Ledger had started 18 months ago in a field office conference room in Atlanta. A cluster of financial reports, a pattern of asset forfeitures that made no sense on paper, and a question nobody in the state had been willing to ask out loud. How does a county sheriff's department seize over $2 million in cash and property from black residents in a 6-year window, file the correct paperwork every single time, and have almost none of it appear in official accounts afterward? Arnold had been assigned to find the answer. He checked his watch. 38 minutes until his scheduled check-in call with his partner, Pat Oslo, back at the Atlanta field office. He reached for the coffee out of habit, remembered it was cold, and set it back down. That was when he saw them. 2 deputies came around the corner on foot, not moving fast, not moving slow. Just walking with the particular kind of purpose that looked casual, but wasn't. Sergeant Kenneth Iverson was in front. Arnold had learned the names of every active deputy in this department by day 2. Iverson was 34 years old, broad across the shoulders, with a jaw that always looked like it was working on something. His partner, Deputy Lance Wilkin, was younger, 29, and he moved a half-step behind Iverson like a man who had learned to follow before he learned to lead. They were positioning themselves at both ends of the diner's front entrance. Arnold was already standing. He left $3 on the table for the coffee he hadn't drunk. Old habit, didn't matter. And walked to the door. He pushed it open and stepped into the afternoon heat, and faced both of them before either one could speak first. "My name is Arnold Parson," he said. His voice was level, unhurried. "I am a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, 24-year veteran, out of the Atlanta field office. My partner is Agent Patrice Oslo, Atlanta field office." He produced his badge and federal ID in one smooth motion, holding them out so both men could see. "I am conducting a federal investigation in this county. I'd like to speak with your senior officer on duty right now. Wilkin looked at the badge. Iverson barely did. Iverson's eyes moved from the credentials to Arnold's face, with the slow, deliberate drag of a man who had already decided something before he walked over here. His expression didn't change. There was no surprise in it, no uncertainty, no flicker of the kind of doubt a man feels when he realizes he might be making a serious mistake. That was the part that told Arnold everything he needed to know. Iverson said, "That ID could be anything. You're going to need to come with us." Arnold looked at him for a moment. "Just a moment. I'm advising you one time," Arnold said. Quiet. Steady. The way a man speaks when he doesn't need to raise his voice to mean it. What you are about to do will end your career. Iverson reached for his handcuffs. The click of the cuffs was loud on the quiet street. Arnold didn't flinch. He stood with his hands locked behind his back on a public sidewalk in broad daylight, badge and federal ID still on the ground where Iverson had knocked them when he grabbed his wrists, and he felt something settle deep in his chest. Not fear, not panic, recognition. He had known this moment was possible. He had not known it would actually happen. There was a difference between knowing something and living it, and the distance between those two things was exactly one pair of handcuffs. Wilkin bent down and picked up the badge and ID. He looked at them for a moment longer than he needed to. His jaw was tight. He handed them to Iverson without a word. Iverson didn't look at them. He pocketed them like they were a parking ticket. "Let's go," he said. A woman coming out of the hardware store 2 doors down stopped on the sidewalk and stared. An old man on a bench across the street looked up from his newspaper. Arnold walked between the 2 deputies in handcuffs, and not one person said a word, and the afternoon just kept going around them like nothing unusual was happening at all. That was the part that hurt the most. Not the cuffs. The silence. Inside the sheriff's department, the air was cold and smelled like burnt coffee and floor cleaner. A desk sergeant looked up when they came through the door. His eyes went to Arnold's face, then to the handcuffs, then back to his computer screen. Iverson walked Arnold to the processing desk. "Suspicious individual," he said to the sergeant. "Possible fake federal credentials. Hold him for verification." "I am a federal agent," Arnold said. Calm. Clear. He looked directly at the desk sergeant when he said it. "Special Agent Arnold Parson, FBI, Atlanta Field Office. My partner is Agent Patrice Oslo. The number for the Atlanta Field Office is listed in any federal directory. One phone call will confirm everything." The sergeant opened his mouth. "Give us a minute," Iverson said to him. The sergeant closed his mouth. He went back to his screen. That was when the side door opened. Deputy Chief Francis Palmer walked in like a man who had just happened to be passing by. He was 58 years old, thick through the middle with silver hair combed neatly to one side and a small American flag pin on his lapel. He had the kind of face that smiled easily and meant nothing by it. "Well now," Palmer said. His voice was warm, almost concerned. "What's going on out here? Some kind of mix-up?" "This individual was casing the building," Iverson said. "Claims to be FBI." Palmer looked at Arnold the way a doctor looks at someone who has just said something confused. Patient. Slightly sad. "Sir, I'm sure we can get this sorted out real quick. If you'll just cooperate with my deputies, we'll have you on your way in no time." Arnold looked at him. "I have already cooperated. I identified myself, produced my credentials, and requested to speak with a senior officer. I would like to make a phone call." "Of course, of course." Palmer waved a hand, like the request was already being handled. "Let's just get you situated first." Situated. Arnold filed that word away. Palmer picked up the desk phone with one hand and produced a small notepad from his shirt pocket with the other. He dialed a number without looking anything up. No directory, no transfer. A number he already knew by heart. The phone rang once. He hung up. He shook his head slowly, like a man delivering unfortunate news. "No answer over at the Atlanta office," he said. "Must be the weekend skeleton crew." He tucked the notepad away and looked at Iverson. "Go ahead and put him in holding until we can get somebody on the line to verify." "I want to speak to the sheriff," Arnold said. "Sheriff's not in today." Palmer smiled. "Don't worry, we'll get this cleared up." The holding cell was in the back. Concrete floor, metal bench, a drain in the center. 2 other men sat against the far wall. One sleeping, one watching Arnold with tired, careful eyes. Arnold sat down on the bench. He put his forearms on his knees. He closed his eyes. He breathed in. He breathed out. That phone call Palmer made, dialed from memory, 1 ring, hung up, had not been to the Atlanta FBI field office. Arnold knew that the way he knew his own name. That call had been theater. Every second of it, theater. He had not missed a check-in call with Pat Oslo in 6 years. She would notice in 38 minutes. He started counting. The check-in window came and went. Pat Oslo sat at her desk in the Atlanta field office and watched the clock on her computer screen tick past the time Arnold was supposed to call. 3 minutes, then 5. She picked up her phone and dialed his cell. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She hung up and dialed again. Same thing. Pat had been Arnold Parsons' partner for 6 years. In 6 years, Arnold had never missed a check-in call. Not once. Not when he had food poisoning in a motel room in Savannah. Not when a source ran 40 minutes late. Not for anything. The man was a clock. You could set your watch by his check-ins. She dialed the field radio frequency he was assigned for the operation. Nothing. She sat very still for exactly 4 seconds. Then she pulled up the cell tower tracking system on her computer and entered Arnold's number. The result came back in under a minute. His phone's last active ping was not at the road construction site where he was supposed to be. It was not at the motel where he was staying. The signal had gone dark inside a building at the corner of Main Street and Caldwell Avenue in Delwood County. Pat knew that address. She had looked at it on a map 50 times in the past 18 months. It was the Delwood County Sheriff's Department. She was already reaching for her phone again. Rosalie Parson picked up on the second ring. She was 60 years old, retired school teacher, and she had been married to a federal agent long enough to know that a call from his partner on a Saturday afternoon was not a social visit. "Pat," she said, just that. Her voice was steady, but the steadiness had a cost in it. "Rosalie, I need to ask you something quickly." Pat kept her voice even. "Did Arnold mention anything this week about watching the sheriff's department directly? Being positioned near the building itself?" A pause. Short. "He said that was where the money was coming from. He said that's where he'd need to be watching." "Okay." Pat was already writing. "Thank you, Rosalie." "Pat." Rosalie's voice dropped a register. "Find him." "Yes, ma'am," Pat said. "That's exactly what I'm doing." She hung up and called Vanessa Butler. Assistant U.S. Attorney Vanessa Butler answered on the first ring, which told Pat she had been working. Pat did not waste time. "Arnold Parson missed his check-in 22 minutes ago," she said. "His phone went dark inside the Delwood County Sheriff's Department, the building he has been investigating for 6 days. I need a federal court order, and I need bodies." 3 seconds of silence. "Give me 15 minutes, Vanessa said. It took her 12. Pat moved through the field office the way water moves through a cracked dam. Fast and without asking permission. She briefed 3 agents in under 4 minutes. She contacted the U.S. Marshal's field office and had a marshal assigned and en route to the parking garage in 8. She printed the federal court order the moment Vanessa emailed it through, folded it into a manila folder along with every piece of documentation she had on Operation Delwood Ledger, and was in the driver's seat of a federal vehicle with the engine running before 30 minutes had passed. The other agents loaded up around her. Nobody spoke much. They didn't need to. Every single person in that convoy understood what it meant when a federal agent's phone signal went dark inside the exact building he was investigating. It didn't mean a dead battery. It didn't mean a dropped call. It meant someone had decided to make a point. Pat pulled out of the parking garage and pointed the car south toward Delwood County. The afternoon sun was already dropping toward the tree line. She drove with both hands on the wheel and her eyes straight ahead. And she thought about Arnold sitting in a booth watching that building through a diner window, and the quiet, careful way he worked, and the 24 years he had given to a job that asked everything and guaranteed nothing. She pressed the accelerator down a little harder. 54 minutes after Arnold's missed check-in, Pat's convoy rolled to a stop in front of the Delwood County Sheriff's Department. She stepped out with the folder under her arm. She did not look around at the building, did not slow down to read the sign above the door, did not hesitate at the bottom of the steps. She walked straight toward the entrance like a woman who had every right to take that building apart, brick by brick. Vanessa Butler was directly behind her. The doors swung open and the room changed. Not loudly, not with shouting or drawn weapons or any of the dramatic things people imagine when they picture 6 federal officers walking into a sheriff's department. It changed the way a room changes when the temperature drops, quietly, completely, and all at once. Pat Oslo walked to the front desk. 3 FBI agents fanned out behind her. The U.S. Marshall stopped just inside the doorway with his arms at his sides. Vanessa Butler moved to Pat's left. Folder open. Court order already visible. The desk sergeant looked up. His eyes did a quick count of the windbreakers and the badges, and the expressions on the faces wearing them. He did not reach for anything. He did not say anything. He just sat there with his hands flat on the desk, like a man waiting to be told what to do next. Francis Palmer appeared from the side hallway. He still had the warm face on. The pleasant, nothing-is-wrong face that Arnold had watched perform concern 2 hours ago. It held for about 3 seconds. Then it didn't. "Deputy Chief Palmer," Pat said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "I am Special Agent Patrice Oslo, FBI Atlanta Field Office. This is Assistant U.S. Attorney Vanessa Butler." She placed the folder on the desk and turned it toward him. "That is a federal court order for the immediate release of Special Agent Arnold Jerome Parson. I need him in front of me in the next 5 minutes." Palmer looked at the court order. He looked at Pat. He opened his mouth. "I can explain what happened here," he said. "There was a miscommunication. My deputies encountered an individual they couldn't verify, and they followed protocol." "Where is he?" Pat said. The pleasantness flickered. Just for a moment. Just enough. "Holding," Palmer said. "Cell 3. Take me there." The holding cell was in the back of the building, past a row of filing cabinets and a bulletin board covered in shift schedules. Pat heard the cell before she saw it. The quiet. The specific kind of silence that only exists behind bars. Arnold was sitting on the metal bench with his forearms on his knees. He looked up when the door to the holding area opened. He looked at Pat, then at the marshal behind her, then back at Pat. Something passed across his face. Not relief exactly. More like a man who had calculated a time and found out he was right. The cell was unlocked in under 3 minutes. Arnold stood. He straightened his shirt. He rolled his shoulders back once, slowly, and walked out of the cell without a word. Pat handed him his badge and federal ID, recovered from Iverson before they came back, and he pocketed them in one clean motion. They walked back through the hallway, past the filing cabinets, past the bulletin board, and into the main room. Palmer was standing near the front desk. He had rearranged his expression back into something that resembled composure. He stepped forward slightly as Arnold came into the room, and he said, smooth and unhurried, like a man who believed the sound of his own voice could reshape a situation. "Agent Parson, I want to personally apologize for any confusion today. My deputies were following procedure, and—" Arnold stopped walking. He turned and looked at Palmer across the room. Just looked at him. No expression, no anger visible. Nothing that gave Palmer anything to push against or respond to. Palmer kept talking. The word misunderstanding came out of his mouth. Arnold held his gaze for 5 full seconds. The room was completely quiet. Nobody moved. Even the desk sergeant seemed to stop breathing. Then Arnold turned away, walked to the front door, pushed it open, and stepped out into the afternoon light. He had been in that cell for 58 minutes. Outside, the sun was lower now, the shadows longer across the main street. Arnold stood on the sidewalk and breathed in the open air and let it settle. Pat came through the door behind him and fell into step at his side. "Rosalie called me," she said. "When you missed your window." Arnold nodded slowly. He looked straight ahead. "How bad was it in there?" Pat asked. "Managed," he said. They walked toward the cars. After a moment, Arnold spoke again without looking at her. "That phone call Palmer made," he said, "the one where he got no answer at the Atlanta office. What about it?" "He dialed it from memory. 1 ring, hung up." He paused. "Find out whose number that was." Pat looked at him. "I already started," she said. The afternoon sun was still bright over Delwood's main street. Arnold stood beside the federal vehicles in the parking lot while Pat opened her laptop on the hood and pulled up the cell tower records. She had run them during the drive down from Atlanta while the convoy was still moving, while Arnold was still in a holding cell counting his breaths. 6 minutes, she said. She turned the screen toward him. Arnold looked at it. A call had been placed to Iverson's personal cell phone at 1:47 in the afternoon, 6 minutes before the 2 deputies had positioned themselves at Ray's diner. The call did not come from a citizen. It did not come from a dispatch line. It came from a landline registered to one specific extension inside the Delwood County Sheriff's Department. Pat tapped the screen. That extension belongs to Palmer's private office. Arnold read the record twice. He straightened up slowly. There had been no citizen complaint, no patrol car rolling by and noticing something suspicious. Palmer had been watching from that second-floor window with the angled blinds, had seen Arnold outside the diner, and had picked up his personal phone and called his sergeant directly. This was not a mistake. It was not a misunderstanding. It was not 2 deputies doing their jobs badly. It was a targeted ambush of a federal agent conducting a federal investigation. "That's obstruction," Arnold said. "Federal felony," Pat said. "Yes." Arnold closed the laptop gently. He looked at the front door of the sheriff's department. Then he looked at Pat. "Where's Vanessa?" Vanessa Butler was already inside. She had asked for Sheriff Luis Underwood, the elected sheriff, Palmer's nominal boss, and had been told he was not in the building. She had called his personal cell herself, identified herself, and used the words "federal obstruction charge" in her first sentence. Sheriff Underwood arrived at the department in 11 minutes. He was 63 years old, gray-haired, and he walked through the front door with the careful expression of a man who had spent his career making sure he never had to know certain things. He did not have that option anymore. Vanessa walked him through it in the conference room off the main hallway. The cell tower record, the call timing, Palmer's private extension, the deliberate, directed nature of the arrest. She put the documentation on the table in front of him 1 page at a time, and let each page do its work. She did not rush it. When she finished, the room was quiet. Sheriff Underwood looked at the pages on the table. He looked at the wall above Vanessa's head. He was a man watching a bridge go out while he was standing on it. "Get them in here," he said finally. His voice was flat and tired. Both of them. It took 7 minutes to locate Palmer and Iverson in the building. They came into the conference room together. Palmer's face was composed. Iverson was reading the room and not liking what he found. Sheriff Underwood stood behind his desk with Vanessa Butler to his right and did not offer either man a seat. He told them what had been found: the call record, the timing, the federal obstruction implications. He did not editorialize. He stated facts the way a man states facts when the facts are bad enough on their own. When he finished, Palmer started to speak. "Luis, I can explain." "Badges," Sheriff Underwood said. "Both of you. And your weapons. On the desk." Palmer stopped talking. A muscle in his jaw moved once. "You are both placed on immediate unpaid administrative suspension," Vanessa said, "pending a federal civil rights and obstruction investigation. Your department access is revoked as of this moment. You are not to enter this building, contact department personnel regarding this matter, or access any case files." Iverson's hand went to his badge. It was shaking. Not a little. Shaking the way a hand shakes when the body understands something the mind is still catching up to. He unpinned it and set it on the desk, with a sound that was somehow too loud in the quiet room. Palmer reached up slowly. He unpinned his badge with the careful, deliberate movements of a man refusing to show what the moment was costing him. He placed it on the desk gently, almost tenderly. Then he looked up. Not at Sheriff Underwood, not at Vanessa. He looked toward the window, and through the glass, in the parking lot below, Arnold Parson was standing beside the federal vehicles with his hands in his pockets, watching the building. Palmer's jaw tightened. He looked away first. 3 hours and 7 minutes after the handcuffs clicked shut on a public sidewalk, 2 men walked out of the Delwood County Sheriff's Department without badges, without weapons, and without jobs. The title promise was complete. The courthouse conference room smelled like old carpet and recycled air. Someone had dragged a whiteboard in from somewhere down the hall. Pat had covered half of it already. Names, dates, dollar amounts, arrows connecting one to the next. Arnold stood in front of it, with his arms crossed and his coffee going cold again, which seemed to be a theme of his week. Outside the windows, Delwood County had gone dark. The main street was quiet. The sheriff's department across town was running on a skeleton crew and a cloud of tension that Arnold imagined he could still feel from here. Vanessa Butler sat at the head of the conference table, her jacket draped over the chair behind her, sleeves rolled to the elbows. She had a legal pad in front of her that was already half filled with notes written in the small, precise handwriting of a woman who did not waste space. "Let's go through what we have," she said. Pat turned to the whiteboard. Operation Delwood Ledger had been running for 18 months. What started as a pattern of suspicious numbers, asset forfeitures that didn't add up, money that left the evidence room and never arrived in official accounts, had grown into something considerably uglier. Over a decade, Palmer's department had seized cash and property from black residents across the county using pretextual charges. Traffic stops that produced large amounts of cash. Drug investigations with no arrests. Property forfeitures tied to cases that were quietly dropped. The money, somewhere between the seizing of it and the recording of it, disappeared. "We're looking at a minimum of $2.3 million, Pat said. She circled a number on the whiteboard. "Probably more. We have documentation on 61 individual seizures. 47 of them targeted black residents. The racial pattern is not subtle." Arnold looked at the number on the board. $2.3 million, taken from people who, in most cases, couldn't afford lawyers to fight back. He had read the individual files. A grandmother who lost $8,000 she had saved over 30 years. A small business owner who lost his work van. A young man who lost $1,100 he had saved for his first month's rent on an apartment. Each case, individually, looked like routine law enforcement. Together, they looked like something else entirely. Vanessa was writing on her legal pad when the knock came at the conference room door. The man in the doorway was 71 years old, short, wearing a brown suit that had been pressed carefully. He held a cardboard box against his chest with both arms, the way you carry something you have carried for a long time and are not ready to put down. The desk officer behind him said, "He came in about an hour ago. Asked to speak to whoever was in charge of the federal investigation. Said it was important." "It is important," the man said. His voice was unhurried and deep, the voice of someone who had spent decades standing in front of rooms full of people and meaning every word. "My name is Reverend Dexter Randall. I pastor First Baptist Church, 2 miles east of here." He looked at Arnold directly. "I heard on the radio what happened to you today. I've been waiting 9 years for someone to show up in this county. I drove here the same hour I heard." Arnold stepped forward and held the door open. "Come in, Reverend." Randall set the box on the conference table and lifted the lid. Inside were folders, dozens of them, packed in tight and organized by year, each one labeled in careful handwriting. Pat leaned forward. Vanessa set down her pen. 14 families, Randall said. Those are their complaints. Going back 9 years. Pattern arrests, false charges, property taken with no return. 2 young men pressured into statements they never should have signed. He placed one hand flat on top of the folders. Every one of those complaints was filed through the proper channels. Every one was documented, submitted, and recorded. He paused. Not one of them was ever acted on. The room was quiet. Arnold reached into the box and lifted one of the folders. He opened it. The first page was a handwritten statement from a woman named Dorothy Elias, dated 7 years ago, describing the seizure of her late husband's truck and the $4,000 in cash she had been carrying to pay for his funeral. He read it once. He closed the folder carefully. He placed it back in the box with both hands. He looked at Reverend Randall, this 71-year-old man who had driven to a federal courthouse on the same day the news broke because he had been waiting 9 years for this moment. And something moved in Arnold's chest that he did not have a name for. Not quite grief, not quite reverence. Something between the two. Then Pat's phone rang. She looked at the screen. She answered it, listened for 30 seconds, and hung up. "Morgan Bishop just filed his first motion," she said. "He's been retained for Palmer and Iverson." She set the phone down. "His retainer alone is $180,000. Vanessa Butler looked up from her legal pad. "Someone with serious money just walked into this fight." Arnold looked at the box. He looked at Reverend Randall. "Then we use everything in it," he said. 7 days had passed since the suspension. The investigation was moving. Pat had traced 3 more forfeiture transactions back to shell accounts. Vanessa had subpoenaed bank records for 2 county officials. Arnold had spent the week driving the county's back roads, visiting the addresses in Randall's folders, introducing himself at front doors with the quiet patience of a man who understood that trust had to be earned in places where it had been taken from. It was slow work. Necessary work. He was at the courthouse on Tuesday morning, reviewing financial records with Pat, when Vanessa walked in with her phone held out in front of her like evidence. "You need to see this," she said. She set the phone on the table and pressed play. The press conference was being held in the state capitol, 2 hours north. The backdrop was a row of American flags. The podium had a seal on it. The man behind the podium had silver hair combed back from a broad forehead, a dark suit, and the particular kind of face that had been photographed enough times to know exactly what angle it looked best from. Congressman Philip Hogan. 6 terms. Judiciary Committee. The kind of politician who had been in office long enough that his name appeared on buildings. He was not shouting. He never shouted. Men like Hogan understood that the quieter you stayed, the more dangerous you sounded. "What we are witnessing in Delwood County," Hogan said, "is a deeply troubling pattern of federal overreach into local law enforcement. Career officers, men who have served their communities for decades, are being suspended without due process, their reputations destroyed, their careers dismantled, before a single fact has been properly established." He paused and looked directly into the camera. "I have known Francis Palmer for 20 years. He is a dedicated public servant. What is being done to him and his deputies is not justice. It is a politically motivated federal operation targeting good officers for doing their jobs. Another pause. I am calling today for an independent review of the FBI's conduct in Delwood County. The American people deserve to know when their federal agencies have been weaponized against the very communities they are supposed to serve. He said the phrase weaponized bureaucracy twice. He never once mentioned that a federal agent had been handcuffed and put in a holding cell. He never mentioned Operation Delwood Ledger. He never mentioned $2.3 million and 61 seized individuals. Vanessa reached over and stopped the video. The conference room was quiet for a moment. He arranged Bishop's retainer, Pat said. She had a file open on the table in front of her. We've been tracing the money since last night. It moved through a political action committee. Delwood County Law Enforcement Support Fund, registered 2 years ago. The PAC received a single deposit of $250,000 6 days ago. The deposit originated from a donor LLC that traces back to a fundraising bundler who has worked exclusively for Hogan's campaigns since 2014. Arnold looked at the paused image on Vanessa's phone. Hogan's face, mid-sentence, composed and righteous. He's been Palmer's patron for 20 years, Arnold said. It was not a question. Best we can document right now, Pat said. Palmer has been delivering Delwood County for Hogan in every election cycle going back to 2006. Voter turnout management, opposition research, making certain local problems disappear before they became state problems. She turned a page. This isn't Hogan helping an old friend. This is Hogan protecting an investment. Arnold pushed back from the table and stood. He walked to the window. Outside, the courthouse parking lot was empty except for 2 pigeons working over something near the dumpster. He thought about the press conference, the careful language, the way Hogan had reframed the entire situation, turned a federal agent being put in a cell into a story about government overreach, turned the victim into the aggressor, turned Palmer into a martyr. It was skillfully done. The kind of thing that worked on people who were only half paying attention. He thought about the 14 families in Randall's box. He thought about the grandmother who lost $8,000 she had saved over 30 years. He wondered if any of them were half paying attention to the news right now. If they saw that press conference. If they heard a 6-term congressman standing in front of American flags and telling the country that the man who had taken their money and buried their complaints was a dedicated public servant. He turned back to the room. How deep does the connection go? He asked. That's what we need to find out, Vanessa said. Then that's what we do next, Arnold said. All of it. Every dollar, every favor, every phone call between them going back as far as we can reach. He looked at Pat. Someone doesn't spend $180,000 on a lawyer for a friend. They spend it on a secret. Pat was already writing. Morgan Bishop filed the emergency reinstatement motion on a Wednesday morning. By Thursday, it had been accepted. By the following Monday, 13 days after Palmer and Iverson set their badges on Sheriff Underwood's desk, a hearing date had been scheduled. The speed of it was not accidental. Emergency motions didn't move that fast on their own. They moved that fast when someone was pushing them. The hearing was set before State Administrative Judge Carol Pittman. Vanessa pulled her record the same night the date was confirmed. Pittman had been appointed to the administrative bench 4 years ago. The appointment had been championed publicly by one Congressman, Philip Hogan, who called her in a press statement Arnold found in 30 seconds of searching a model of judicial temperament and fairness. Arnold read that twice and said nothing. The hearing convened at 9 in the morning in a wood-paneled room on the 3rd floor of the county administrative building. Bishop was already seated when Arnold, Pat, and Vanessa arrived. He was 61 years old, lean, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a yellow legal pad on the table in front of him that had almost nothing written on it. Men who were very good at this didn't need many notes. Vanessa moved immediately to have the hearing opened to the public. Judge Pittman denied it before the sentence was fully out of Vanessa's mouth. Vanessa stood at the table and said carefully, that a public proceeding was standard practice in administrative suspension reviews of this nature, and that closing it set a troubling precedent for transparency. Pittman looked at her over her own reading glasses. "Motion denied, Counselor. Let's proceed." Pat, seated beside Arnold in the observer chairs along the wall, wrote one word on her notepad and tilted it toward him: predetermined. Arnold gave the smallest nod. Bishop argued for 90 minutes without raising his voice once. He was good. Arnold had known he would be good, but watching it in person was something else. Bishop built his case the way a careful man builds a wall, one brick at a time, each one fitted precisely against the last. No gaps, no wobble. Iverson had encountered an individual whose credentials he could not verify through standard channels. He had followed departmental protocol for unverified identification claims. He had acted under the direction of a superior officer. The suspension was punitive in nature, not procedural, and had been imposed without proper administrative review. He never mentioned the cell tower record. He never mentioned Palmer's phone call to Iverson's personal cell 6 minutes before the arrest. He built an entire version of events that was technically accurate in every individual detail and completely false in every way that mattered. Judge Pittman watched him the way a person watches a movie they have already seen and enjoyed. Then Vanessa stood up. She laid out the cell tower record, the call from Palmer's private extension, the precise 6-minute window, the fact that Iverson's personal cell, not a dispatch line, had received a direct instruction from his superior before a single patrol car had moved, the targeted nature of the arrest, the federal obstruction implications. Pittman interrupted her twice in the first 20 minutes, once to question the admissibility of the cell tower documentation, once to ask whether the federal investigation itself had been properly disclosed to the relevant state oversight body prior to the undercover deployment. Vanessa answered both challenges cleanly and completely. Pittman moved on without acknowledging the answers. During the afternoon recess, Arnold sat in the hallway on a wooden bench outside the hearing room. The hallway was empty, except for a janitor pushing a cart slowly toward the far end. Afternoon light came through a window at the corridor's end and lay in a long, pale rectangle on the floor. Arnold sat with his forearms on his knees. He looked at the rectangle of light. In 24 years, he had learned to read rooms. He had learned to read judges and juries and witnesses and suspects and the particular language that people spoke when they were trying not to say what they meant. He had read this room all morning. He knew what Pittman was going to do. He did not know yet how to stop it. That evening, the three of them sat in the courthouse conference room that had started to feel like a second office. Vanessa dropped her legal pad on the table and pressed both hands flat against the surface. "Pittman took it under advisement," she said. "The ruling could come tonight, could come next week. We have no way to know. Whatever she decides about Iverson," Pat said, "Palmer's federal obstruction charge is untouchable by this proceeding. That charge lives in federal court. Pittman has zero jurisdiction over it." Arnold looked at the whiteboard, at the numbers, at the names. "Then we keep building," he said. "Whatever she rules, we keep building." Nobody disagreed, but the room felt smaller than it had that morning. The withdrawals started quietly. 3 days after the hearing, Arnold got a call from Vanessa. She had been trying to schedule formal interviews with the families from Randall's complaint files. The 14 families whose documented experiences formed the backbone of the civil rights portion of the investigation. 3 of them had called back within the same 24-hour window to say they were no longer able to participate. They used different words. The meaning was identical. Arnold asked Vanessa if anyone had approached them directly. She said not that anyone could prove. That was the point. He drove out to see Reverend Randall the next morning. They sat in the church office, a small room lined with bookshelves and smelling of old paper and lemon wood polish. Randall had a cup of tea he wasn't drinking. Arnold laid it out plainly. 3 families pulling back. The timing. The pattern. Randall nodded slowly, like a man hearing news he had been expecting and dreading in equal measure. "It started 2 days ago," he said. "I've been hearing things from the congregation. People are scared. Not the loud kind of scared. The quiet kind. The kind that comes from experience." "What are they seeing?" Randall set his tea down. "Deacon Williams runs a dry cleaning shop on Route 9. Deputy car been parked across the street every morning this week. Just sitting there. Engine running. Not doing anything. Just sitting." He folded his hands on the desk. "A young man named Sonny Gibbs. His mother attends service here every Sunday. Sonny is on parole. His officer showed up at his house unannounced 3 days ago for a quote-unquote routine check. Sonny wasn't due a visit for 3 more weeks." Arnold was quiet. "And Sandra Mott," Randall continued. "She owns a small alteration shop downtown. Health inspector came by Tuesday. First visit in 4 years. He looked at Arnold steadily. "Nothing found. Nothing cited. Man just walked around for 40 minutes writing things on a clipboard and left. 3 different families. 3 different methods. Nothing that could be filed as a complaint. Nothing that could be traced to a specific order or a specific person. Just the constant, grinding reminder that certain people were watching. That certain people had reach. That certain people could make your life complicated in ways that were very difficult to explain to a federal attorney." Arnold understood what he was hearing. He had seen versions of it before, in other counties, other cases. The machine didn't always use force. Sometimes it just leaned. Quietly, persistently, in the specific places where the leaning would hurt most. He and Randall drove together to the Tremble house that afternoon. Margaret Tremble lived in a small yellow house at the end of a gravel road, set back from the street behind 2 oak trees that were older than the house. She answered the door in a house dress, a dish towel over her shoulder, and looked at Arnold with the careful, assessing eyes of a woman who had learned not to extend trust quickly. She let them in. She did not offer coffee. They sat in her living room. Family photographs covered the wall behind the couch. Weddings, graduations, children at various ages in various seasons. A life, documented in frames. Arnold looked at those photographs while Randall explained why they had come. Margaret Tremble listened with her hands folded in her lap. When Randall finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Arnold. Not unkindly. Just directly. The way a person looks at someone they have decided to be honest with. "I believe you mean well," she said. "I do. But I need you to understand something." She glanced at the photographs on the wall. "My son Deshaun works at a warehouse 40 minutes from here. My granddaughter catches a school bus on this road every morning. I have a business license that comes up for renewal in April." She paused. "You are going to finish your investigation and drive back to Atlanta. And I am going to be here. Same as I've always been. Same as these families have always been." The room was very quiet. Arnold did not offer her a guarantee he couldn't keep. He did not tell her it would be fine. He had too much respect for her to do either of those things. He said, "I hear you, Mrs. Tremble. Everything you just said is true and fair, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise." She nodded once. He and Randall drove back to the church without speaking. That evening, Arnold told Pat and Vanessa what he already knew, but now felt in his bones. The case had to stand on its evidence. The families who were pulling back were not failing anyone. They were surviving. He needed someone on the inside. 2 days after the Tremble visit, Pat found Joshua Vicks. She had been following a wire transfer chain for 72 hours. County contractor's account to a private LLC to a personal savings account to a man who had retired from the Delwood County Sheriff's Department in 2021 after 9 years as evidence room supervisor. The retirement had been quiet and quick. No ceremony, no department photograph. just a man who was there 1 week and gone the next. Joshua Vicks was 60 years old and living comfortably in a house that his county pension alone could not explain. The grand jury subpoena was served on a Thursday morning. Vicks arrived at the federal building in Atlanta with a private attorney and the careful, rigid posture of a man who had been rehearsing how to sit in a chair like this. He was heavy-set, with close-cut gray hair and hands that stayed folded on the table in front of him the entire time, like he was keeping them somewhere he could watch them. He looked at Arnold once when he came in, then he looked at the table and mostly stayed there. But he talked. Once he started, he talked for 4 hours. He described the asset forfeiture scheme from the inside out, the way seizures were selected, the way paperwork was filed to look clean, the way cash moved from the evidence room through a series of informal accounts before being divided. He was precise. He was detailed. He named Palmer 18 times. He named the county commissioner. He named 2 local judges who received regular payments through what was described as civic organization dues. And then, carefully, in language that circled the edge of something without quite landing on it, he described receiving instructions through an intermediary, someone he referred to as a political friend of the department, someone whose instructions arrived not through official channels, but through a phone call to Palmer, after which Palmer would come down to the evidence room personally and tell Vicks what needed to happen that week. He never said the name Hogan, but the description was detailed enough that everyone in the room heard it anyway. Arnold drove back to Delwood that evening. He sat in the parking lot of the motel and called Rosalie. "It's looking good," he told her. He leaned back against the headrest. Outside, the Georgia night was warm and full of crickets. "I think I'll be home by the weekend." Rosalie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'll believe it when I see your car in the driveway." He laughed. It was the first time he had laughed in 2 weeks. The next morning arrived in pieces, each one worse than the last. The first piece, Judge Pittman issued her ruling at 7:45 in the morning. Kenneth Iverson was reinstated to active duty with full back pay, effective immediately. The ruling cited insufficient procedural grounds for the suspension and determined that Iverson's actions had not demonstrably deviated from departmental protocol. Palmer's suspension was upheld. The federal obstruction evidence was too direct even for Pittman to dismiss. But Iverson was back. By 9 in the morning, he was in the department parking lot in uniform. The second piece came from Pat at 10. She had been monitoring Vicks out of caution. That morning, Joshua Vicks had walked into a car dealership 40 minutes outside Atlanta and purchased a Lexus sedan. Cash. Pat had the dealer's transaction record on her screen when she called Arnold. Arnold called Vicks's attorney. By noon, a letter had been submitted to the grand jury stating that Vicks had overstated his certainty regarding the political intermediary. The testimony about Hogan's connection, thin as it already was gone. Someone had reached Vicks overnight. Someone with enough money to buy a man's recollection and enough sense to do it quietly. The third piece was the worst. Bishop filed a motion at 2 in the afternoon challenging the procedural validity of Operation Delwood Ledger's undercover component. His argument was narrow and technical. The investigation's deployment had not been disclosed to the relevant state oversight body within the required window before Arnold went into the field. The gap was small. It was also real. The motion triggered a mandatory 60-day compliance review. All new warrants were frozen. All compelled testimony was suspended. The investigation was not dead, but it was in a box with a lid on it. Vanessa called Arnold at 11 that night. Her voice was flat and controlled in the way that meant she was furious. She told him Bishop had known about the disclosure gap before they did. Someone inside the task force had fed it to him. Arnold drove to Reverend Randall's church and sat in the parking lot with the engine off and the windows down. The night was still warm. The crickets were still going. He thought about Margaret Tremble. "You're going to leave. We're still going to be here." He sat there for a long time. He did not sleep. Arnold sat in the church parking lot until past midnight. Then he drove to Atlanta. Not to the field office, not to the motel. He drove to a diner off the interstate that stayed open all night and had bad lighting and good coffee, and he called Pat from the parking lot before he went inside. "I'm at the Waffle House on 75, he said. "Come meet me." Pat arrived 20 minutes later. She slid into the booth across from him, still wearing the clothes she'd had on all day, her hair pulled back, a legal pad tucked under her arm. She looked at his face and did not ask how he was doing. She ordered coffee and opened the pad. "Let's work," she said. That was why she was his partner. Arnold drew a line down the center of a paper napkin with a pen from his shirt pocket. On the left side, he wrote one word: "Gone." On the right side, he wrote another: "Still here." "The stay freezes new warrants," he said. "New testimony. Anything compelled going forward, we can't touch for 60 days. He wrote those things on the left side. Vix's political testimony, gone. Iverson reinstated. 3 witnesses withdrawn. Hogan connection, severed for now. He looked at the right side of the napkin. "What Bishop cannot touch," he said. Vix's financial testimony. Everything he said about the money, the transfers, the accounts, the names, that's already in the grand jury record. Sealed and protected. The stay doesn't reach backward. He wrote that down. Randall's complaint files. 14 families. 9 years of documentation. Independent evidence. Never part of the undercover operation. Untouchable. He wrote that. Palmer's federal obstruction charge. Lives entirely in federal court. Pittman never had jurisdiction over it. Bishop's motion doesn't affect it. He wrote that too. He set the pen down and looked at what he had. The right side of the napkin wasn't empty. It was thinner than he wanted. But it was not nothing. Pat was studying it. She reached over and tapped the word she had written in the margin of her legal pad while he was talking. One word. Leak. "That's the center of it," she said. "Bishop knew about the disclosure gap before we did. That information existed in exactly one place, the task force procedural file. Iverson had liaison access to that file for 1 week, 2 months ago. He accessed it twice." She turned the pad toward Arnold. 3 hours after his second access, he sent an email from his personal account to Bishop's firm, to a shell account managed through Bishop's firm. Yes. She tapped the pad again. The stay motion was built on information Iverson stole from inside our own investigation and handed to the other side, which means the motion itself was built on tainted evidence. Arnold looked at her. "If we can document that chain," he said slowly, "Vanessa can move to vacate the stay." "That's the play," Pat said. "We need Iverson's carrier records, phone, email, everything from that week. We can get there through a targeted subpoena, narrow enough that it doesn't trigger the stay's restrictions because it's not compelled testimony. It's a third-party communication record." Arnold nodded. He looked at the napkin. Then he looked past it, at the window, at the dark interstate sliding by outside. He thought about Iverson, back in uniform, parked in his old spot, walking those hallways again. Nodding at people he worked with like the last 3 weeks had been a bad dream he had woken up from. But Iverson had no Hogan behind him, no Bishop on retainer in his name. He had been Palmer's instrument, useful while Palmer needed him, expendable the moment Palmer needed someone to carry the weight. And Palmer, still suspended, still facing a federal obstruction charge that nothing in the last 2 weeks had touched, was looking at the future with the clear eyes of a man who understood that cooperation agreements existed for a reason. Iverson was standing in a hallway between 2 doors, and one of them was going to close. "There's someone else," Arnold said. Pat waited. "Wilkin." He said the name quietly, almost to himself. "Iverson's partner at the arrest. He was there when the cuffs went on. He looked at my badge, and he looked away." Arnold turned the napkin over. A man looks away because he already knows something he doesn't want to know. That's not innocence. That's a conscience. Pat wrote the name down. Randall might know him, Arnold said. Delwood's a small county. Everybody knows somebody. I'll ask him in the morning. Arnold looked at the napkin one more time. Then he folded it and put it in his pocket. We're not done, he said. Pat picked up her coffee. We were never done. Arnold drove back to Delwood before the sun came up. He had slept 3 hours on the motel room bed without taking his shoes off, and woken at 4:15 feeling like he had never closed his eyes at all. He splashed water on his face, drove through a gas station for coffee in a paper cup, and was on the road south before the Atlanta skyline had caught its first light. He pulled into Reverend Randall's church at 5:30. The lights were already on in the back. Randall was in the church kitchen making oatmeal when Arnold knocked on the side door. The old man looked at him, looked at the dark sky behind him, and stepped back to let him in without a word. He set a second bowl on the counter without being asked. They ate standing up. Arnold told him about the napkin, the leak, Iverson's carrier records, the subpoena they were building. Randall listened with the focused stillness of a man who had learned to hear what mattered and let the rest pass. When Arnold finished, he asked his question. Is there anyone in that department who ever looked uncomfortable? Someone who showed a conscience, even once? Randall was quiet for a moment. He turned his spoon in the bowl slowly. Lance Wilkin, he said. Arnold set his coffee down. Iverson's partner, Randall continued. Born here, grew up 3 streets over from this church. His mother, Dora Wilkin, has sat in the 4th pew from the front every Sunday for 30 years. Randall looked at Arnold steadily. After your arrest, Dora came to me privately. Said her son hadn't slept since it happened. Wouldn't tell her why. Just said he'd seen something he couldn't get out of his head. Can you arrange a meeting? Randall considered it. I can ask Dora to ask him. Whether he comes is up to him. Tonight, Arnold said. If possible, tonight. Wilkin arrived at the church parking lot at dusk. He pulled in driving a personal truck, not a cruiser, and sat in the cab for 2 full minutes before he got out. Arnold watched from the side doorway. 29 years old. Thin through the shoulders in a way that made him look younger than his age. He walked across the gravel with his hands in his jacket pockets and his eyes on the ground in front of him. The walk of a man carrying something he had been carrying too long. Arnold stepped outside to meet him. They stood in the parking lot in the early evening air. Somewhere down the road a dog was barking at something. The church windows threw pale yellow light across the gravel. Wilkin spoke first. I can't lose my job. His voice was tight. I have a wife. We have an 8-month-old daughter. I need you to understand that before anything else. I understand it, Arnold said. I'm not asking you to do anything tonight, except talk to me. Wilkin looked at him for a moment. Then he looked away. He took a breath, and he talked. He said that on the morning of the arrest, he arrived at the department for his shift and found Iverson already there, which was unusual. Iverson was never early. Iverson was on his personal cell in the corner of the locker room, half turned away. Wilkin caught pieces of it. The words, the guy from the diner. The words, Palmer says, make it clean. Iverson saw him listening and ended the call and said nothing about it. Then, when they were walking toward Ray's diner 20 minutes into the shift, Iverson said unprompted and without any context, This guy is going to give us some trouble. Don't say anything, just follow my lead. Wilkin hadn't understood what that meant until he watched Iverson put handcuffs on a man holding a federal badge. I should have said something, Wilkin said. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. He pressed his lips together. I know that. I've known it every day since. You're saying something now, Arnold said. Wilkin was quiet. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out his personal cell phone. He held it out. On the screen was a text message from Iverson, sent 3 weeks ago, time-stamped at 11:47 at night. late enough that Arnold could picture exactly how it had been written. A man alone, scared, unable to sleep. The text read, "If this goes federal, I had nothing to do with what H told me to do at the diner. I was following orders. You were there. You know." Arnold read it twice. He looked up. "Has anyone else seen this?" "No." "Will you file a voluntary witness statement?" Wilkin wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He stood up straighter. "My mother goes to this church," he said. Like that was the whole answer. Like that was all the reason a man needed. Arnold nodded slowly. "That's enough," he said. Wilkin filed his voluntary witness statement the next morning. Arnold sat with him in the federal building in Atlanta for 2 hours, while Vanessa Butler's paralegal typed every word. Wilkin was precise and steady throughout. Steadier than Arnold expected. Steadier, perhaps, than Wilkin expected of himself. He did not embellish. He did not dramatize. He stated what he had heard, what he had seen, and what he had received on his personal phone, and he signed his name at the bottom of 4 pages without hesitating. When it was done, he stood and shook Arnold's hand. His grip was firm. "What happens now?" he asked. "We use what you gave us," Arnold said, "carefully and correctly, and we protect you in the process." Wilkin nodded once. He put his jacket on and left. Arnold watched him walk down the hallway and thought about the 8-month-old daughter at home, and the 30 years his mother had sat in the 4th pew from the front, and what it cost a young man to walk into a federal building and sign his name to the truth. Pat had the subpoena for Iverson's personal carrier records filed and approved before noon. It was targeted and narrow, specific to Iverson's personal phone and email accounts during his 1-week task force liaison assignment. Because it was a third-party communication record rather than compelled testimony, it existed outside the stay's restrictions entirely. The carrier responded within 6 hours. Pat spread the records across the conference table that afternoon and went through them with the focused, unhurried attention of a woman who had learned that the most important thing in any document was usually the thing that looked ordinary. She found it in 40 minutes. Iverson had accessed the investigation's procedural disclosure file twice during his liaison week, once on a Tuesday afternoon, once on a Thursday morning. The Thursday access was 7 minutes long. 3 hours and 12 minutes after that access ended, an outgoing email was sent from Iverson's personal account to an address that resolved, through 2 layers of registration, to a server managed by Morgan Bishop's private legal firm. The email contained one attachment. The attachment was a scanned copy of the investigation's procedural disclosure documentation, the exact document that formed the foundation of Bishop's stay motion. Pat set the record down and looked at Arnold. "He photographed it on his phone and emailed it," she said. "Didn't even try to cover it." "He thought he was protected," Arnold said. He was wrong. Vanessa Butler read the carrier records twice, set them down, and picked up her phone. She called Iverson's attorney at 4 in the afternoon. She did not warm up to the conversation. She told him what she had, what it meant, and what the federal exposure looked like for a man who had stolen documentation from inside an active federal investigation and delivered it to opposing counsel. She used the word felony 4 times in 3 minutes. She told him his client had until 8 the next morning to decide whether he wanted to cooperate. Then she called the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals and began preparing an emergency motion to vacate the stay based on tainted evidence. Arnold sat at the end of the conference table and let the machinery run. He was thinking about the text message. "If this goes federal, I had nothing to do with what H told me to do at the diner. I was following orders. You were there." Iverson had written that in the dark at midnight, drunk on fear, and sent it to the one person who had been standing beside him at the diner. He had not been careful. He had not been strategic. He had been a frightened man reaching for someone to share the weight with, and in doing so, he had signed his own confession. Some men built their own traps without knowing it. Iverson's attorney called Vanessa at 7:58 the next morning, 2 minutes before her deadline. Iverson would cooperate fully. He wanted a plea agreement. 2 counts, reduced sentencing recommendation, full cooperation with the federal investigation going forward. Vanessa said she would review the terms. She called Arnold immediately after. Her voice was controlled and precise, the way it got when something significant had shifted. "He's ready to talk," she said. "All of it. Palmer, the arrest, the intermediary, the PAC money." Arnold looked out the office window at the Atlanta skyline. Morning light was cutting hard across the buildings. "Set it up," he said. Iverson sat across the table from Vanessa that afternoon, with his attorney beside him, and talked for 3 hours without stopping. He confirmed that Palmer had personally directed the arrest. He identified the intermediary who had connected Hogan's political operation to Palmer's department. Not Hogan directly, but Hogan's chief of staff, whose name was now in the federal record. He described in precise detail how county forfeiture money had been routed into Hogan's campaign operation through the Delwood County Law Enforcement Support Fund passee. By the time he finished, the stay had been vacated by the 11th Circuit. The investigation was open again, fully, completely. And this time, there was no disclosure gap. There was no technical argument. There was no motion Bishop could file that would put the lid back on what had just been opened. Arnold drove back to Delwood that evening. He passed the sheriff's department on his way to the motel. The lights were on inside. 2 cruisers were parked out front. He did not stop. He kept driving. Tomorrow was going to be a long day. The grand jury reconvened the morning after the stay was vacated. Arnold did not attend. Grand jury proceedings were closed, and his role now was to wait, which was, in his experience, the hardest part of any investigation. He had spent 17 days building this case brick by brick, and now it was in other people's hands, and there was nothing left for him to do but sit in the courthouse hallway on a wooden bench and drink bad coffee from a vending machine, and trust that the work had been good enough. He sat there for 6 hours. Vanessa came out at 4 in the afternoon. She walked down the hallway toward him with her jacket over her arm and her legal pad against her chest, and the particular expression on her face of a woman who has just watched something large and inevitable finally land. She sat down beside him on the bench. 17 counts, she said, across 6 defendants. The marshal's office executes at 6 tomorrow morning. Arnold looked at the far wall for a moment. "All of them?" he said. "All of them." He drove back to Delwood that night and parked down the street from the sheriff's department and sat in the dark with the engine off. The building was lit from inside, cruisers in the lot, a deputy visible through the front window at the desk. Normal, quiet. A Tuesday night in a county seat that had no idea what 6 o'clock in the morning was going to bring. Arnold sat there for 20 minutes. Then he drove to the motel and slept for 7 hours straight, which was the most he had slept since this began. The federal marshals arrived at Francis Palmer's house at 6 in the morning. Arnold was not there for that either. He heard about it from Pat, who heard it from the marshal's office, who sent a brief field report at 6:22. Palmer had answered the door himself. He was already dressed, pressed shirt, slacks, shoes laced, as if he had known, or perhaps simply refused to be caught in anything less than full composure. He had said nothing when they read the charges. 14 counts: obstruction of a federal officer, civil rights violations, wire fraud, conspiracy to deprive citizens of constitutional rights. He had placed his hands behind his back and walked to the marshal's vehicle without assistance. The report noted that his wife had watched from the front doorway, that the American flag was visible on the lawn, that the thin blue line ornament sat by the mailbox in the early morning light. Arnold read that detail and thought about a Saturday afternoon and a pair of handcuffs clicking shut on a public sidewalk. He thought about 58 minutes on a metal bench in a concrete room. He thought about the word misunderstanding coming out of a man's mouth with a smile attached to it. He set the report down. He got dressed. He drove to the federal building. By noon, the machinery was running at full speed, and Arnold stood in the middle of it. Kenneth Iverson appeared in federal court at 10 and entered his guilty plea on 2 counts. His attorney had negotiated the reduced sentencing recommendation. Iverson stood at the defendant's table in a suit instead of a uniform and said the words "guilty" and "guilty" in a voice that was barely above a whisper. His career was over. It had been over since the moment he reached for those handcuffs on a Delwood sidewalk. It had just taken this long for the paperwork to confirm it. County Commissioner Carlos Allen and 2 local judges, Honorable Frank Sessoms and Honorable Caesar Birch, were indicted on conspiracy and fraud charges by early afternoon. All 3 were processed and released on bond. All 3 declined to comment to the reporters who had materialized outside the federal building by midday, drawn by the specific scent that reporters develop for days when multiple indictments land at once. Morgan Bishop's disbarment proceedings were initiated by the state bar before the day was out. He would fight them. Arnold already knew he would fight them. Men like Bishop always fought. But the documented leak, Iverson's email, the carrier records, the scanned disclosure document sent to Bishop's firm shell account, was not a matter of interpretation. It was a matter of timestamps. That afternoon, at 2:45, Arnold stood on the sidewalk outside the Delwood County Sheriff's Department and watched Francis Palmer being walked out of the federal building across the street in handcuffs. Palmer moved the same way he always moved, straight-backed, controlled, composed. The pleasantness was gone. What remained underneath it was simply a man walking where the marshals directed him to walk. Deputies stood in the doorway of the sheriff's department watching. Not one of them spoke. Not one of them moved. They stood with their hands at their sides and watched their deputy chief put in a vehicle in the same county where he had run everything for 30 years. Arnold watched too. He thought about the cell tower record, the one ring, the hang-up, the private number dialed from memory. He thought about Reverend Randall's cardboard box and Dorothy Elias's $4,000 and Darius Moran, who was 34 years old and carrying a felony record that had cost him everything a record can cost a person. He thought about all of it. Then he put his hands in his pockets and walked back to his car. There was still one more thing left to do. The Sunday morning service at Delwood First Baptist started at 10. Arnold slipped in through the side door at 5 past and took a seat in the back pew before anyone could notice him. The church was full. Every row, the folding chairs along the side walls, people standing quietly at the back in their good clothes with their programs in their hands. Word had traveled through Delwood the way word travels in small communities, fast and complete. Everyone in this building knew what the past 3 weeks had meant. Reverend Randall stood at the pulpit and looked out over his congregation for a long moment before he spoke. Then he reached down beside the pulpit and lifted the cardboard box. He held it with both arms, the way Arnold had first seen him hold it, the way you carry something you have carried a long time. He turned it so the congregation could see it. Several people in the front rows recognized it immediately. A woman in a blue hat pressed her hand to her mouth. 9 years, Randall said. His voice was low and steady, and filled the room without effort. 9 years I have been carrying this box. 9 years of names and dates and statements and evidence that this community was being robbed in broad daylight by the very people paid to protect it. He paused. 9 years of filing the right paperwork and sending it to the right offices, and being told, in one way or another, that nobody was listening. The church was completely silent. Somebody listened, Randall said. He walked down from the pulpit and placed the box on the altar with both hands, gently, the way you set something down when you are finally ready to let it rest. Then he straightened up and looked at his congregation, and his eyes moved to the back pew for just a moment. Arnold sat with his forearms on his knees and his jaw tight. He did not look away. Several of the elderly women in the front rows were weeping openly. The man beside Arnold, a stranger, 60 or so in a brown jacket, was nodding slowly with his eyes closed. Outside, through the high windows, the Georgia morning was blue and clear and indifferent to the particular enormity of what was happening inside this building. Arnold thought about Dorothy Elias's $4,000. He thought about Margaret Tremble's photographs on the wall. He thought about a young man named Darius Moran. The letter had been sent to Moran's Atlanta address on Friday. Vanessa Butler's office had built the parallel case during the final days of the investigation. Iverson's cooperation statement had identified Moran by name, confirming what Elmore's documentation had suggested. A 25-year-old man, pressured into a false confession by Methods Palmer's department, had refined over years, who had served 4 years in a Georgia state prison for a crime he did not commit. Upon release, he had carried a felony record for 9 years. 3 jobs lost, 1 apartment denied, 1 relationship that had not survived the weight of what prison does to a person. He was 34 years old and living alone in a 1-bedroom apartment in southwest Atlanta. He was standing at his kitchen counter eating cereal when the letter arrived. He read it once. He set his bowl down. He read it again, slowly, moving his lips slightly over the formal language the way a person does when the words are too important to risk misunderstanding. The letter informed him that his conviction was being formally vacated, that the State Compensation Review Board would receive his file within 30 days, that the Attorney General's office would be in contact. He stood at the counter for a long time. Outside his window, Atlanta went about its Saturday. Traffic and pigeons and a child on a bicycle, and the city simply continuing, as cities do, without pausing for the private enormity of a single moment in a single kitchen. Darius Moran put his hands over his face. When he took them away, his face was wet. He was looking out the window at something that wasn't quite the street. It was the first time in 9 years that a door had opened toward him instead of away. Arnold sat across from the Atlanta FBI field office director on a Friday morning. A commendation letter sat on the desk between them. Beside it, a promotion offer. Senior supervisory agent, administrative track, a corner office, regular hours. The kind of position a 24-year veteran had earned 10 times over. The director said, "You've earned this, Arnold." Arnold looked at the letter. He thought about Delwood, about Randall's box on the altar, about Moran reading a letter at a kitchen counter with his hands over his face. He slid the papers back across the desk. "I appreciate it," he said, "but I'd like to stay in the field." He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He moved to the door and paused with his hand on the frame. "We opened pattern reviews on 3 more counties last week," he said. "I'd like to see those through." He walked out. The door closed quietly behind him. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.